When I was a little boy, aged 8, my father encouraged me to join him at an event that even now, 50 years on, is etched in my childhood mind. It was Dawn Service in Martin Place in Sydney. Now, I didn't know what Dawn Service was. I had no idea. But I went along, and I'm sure I had no choice. It was 1972. It was a time when we still had some troops in Vietnam. But I was oblivious to all that. I was just a kid, hanging out with his dad on a cold morning. It must have been cold because Mum had sent me off in one of those coats that had big wooden toggles instead of buttons. Dad and I were standing near a place where very, very old men with gold braid and jangly medals were being dropped off and whisked away to somewhere I couldn't quite see. I was holding my dad's hand. He was a dashing Navy commander. He was in uniform, of course, wearing some medals, and I was fascinated by the ritual of people saluting one another, and everyone was smoking. We were standing there holding bits of paper like you are, and the service meandered. I was probably a bit bored. We were reading words off the sheet. Occasionally we were singing songs. And then it all went extremely quiet, eerily quiet. And someone started playing what I assumed was a trumpet. At that point, something changed. The grip in my hand from Dad changed. Enough for me to look up and see tears streaming down his cheeks. At that point, the foundations of my young life shifted. My hero, the warship captain hero, in uniform, had been brought to tears by 2 notes on what I now know was a bugle. I was really confused, and it took me a long time to join the dots. I think I knew at that time that Dad's father had been killed in a sea battle. But what I didn't understand was that he had been a little boy of 8 when his mother received one of those awful wartime telegrams that said, "Mrs. Martin, with deep regret, I must inform you that your husband, Commander W.H. Martin, is missing as a result of enemy action. The Navy Board and the Minister for the Navy expressed their deep regret." So there it was, 1942. My dad's father was missing in action. For the remainder of the war, periodically, my dad would write letters to his missing father, optimistically, hoping, I guess, to hear something back. Quite late in the war, he wrote a letter that said, "Dear Daddy, I hope you are quite well. We've been keeping the house and garden in order. Both those jobs are tedious." The letter went on and he concluded by saying, "Daddy, I'm itching to see you after these 3.5 years. I've been looking after money for you." This brave little boy writing to his missing father, "I'm looking after money for you." Sadly, at the end of the war, Dad and his mum received further correspondence that said, "Exhaustive investigations have now been concluded and there can be no hope that your husband has survived the war." So at war's end, my dad and his mum were missing Commander W.H. Martin, assumed killed in action. He'd been killed serving as second in command of HMAS Perth, one of Australia's most famous and courageous fighting ships, in the Battle of Sunda Strait against the Japanese invasion force. And like 322 of his shipmates that night, he has no grave but the cruel sea. No flowers lay at his head. A rusting hulk is his tombstone, afast the ocean bed. And perhaps it was this, the naval ode, that my father was thinking of as he was holding my hand in Martin Place in 1972, weeping for his dead father. When I first had the opportunity to hold the hand of my young son at an Australian War Memorial on ANZAC Day, I had cause to think about 3 generations of Australian Navy men, of service and sacrifice, of wives and war widows. And it's this Navy story, this family story, that defines what ANZAC Day is for me. I believe it's a day for us to pause, to reflect, and to grieve. There are hundreds of other days each year where we can and should celebrate joyously what it is to be Australian and to enjoy the liberties and freedoms we have. But this is the day we should come together as we are and pause and reflect and find a way to honour the sacrifice of two different groups of Australians. Firstly, those hundreds of thousands who have been off to represent us and fight for us, and in the case of over 102,000 of them, to die for us. And the second group is the families who have watched a family member head off to war and been left at home to deal with the consequences, left at home to deal with uncertainty and an uncertain future, like my dad's mother, facing a future without a husband and watching a young son write letters to his missing father. We should also take a moment to think about those servicemen and women in more recent times who were affected by humanitarian operations, peacekeeping operations, and border protection operations. These people and their families deserve our full support. My father's no longer with us. He died in 1990, 3 days after standing down as the 34th Governor of New South Wales, due to ill health. But on his deathbed, he established a foundation, the Sir David Martin Foundation, caring for some of this community's most vulnerable youngsters. So even now, 30 years on, the legacy remains service and sacrifice, lest we forget.